And we're off.
And they're off, and the lead is James, and he started the talking on the podcast. And then next is Nathan, and he started doing a weird voice.
Old-timey horse racing voice.
And I'm bad at improv at this way because
We were off to a good start, but then we started recording, and it just sort of fell apart from there.
Well, here's the thing. The rate at which I can form sentences in my mind and the rate at which I can speak sentences from my mouth are different. And so they kind of collide.
They're out of sync, as it were.
Yeah. So I tend to stammer quite a bit when just to fill space when I'm not sure what I need to say. Because my brain's taking the time to put stuff together.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could ever run.
There's this one place.
It would turn into the scat man.
There's this one place in Fallout 4 where it's like this old horse racing park, and you hear old-timey horse race announcer voice off in the distance, and you get closer and closer, and it's just like a bunch of raiders racing like these drones around a track over and over again. And as you walk up to them, they get really mad at you and all attack you. I was like, I just wanted to watch the race, man. But guess you're not allowed to have nice things in a post-nuclear apocalypse world.
That's typically
or Boston.
Why it's
or Boston
or Boston
or Detroit.
Yeah. Is Detroit featured in any Fallout games?
No, but you know the classic idiom, you can't have anything in Detroit.
Oh yeah.
Nice version.
Yeah.
I
don't know that I'll ever have an occasion to go to Detroit.
I have, and I will have another. I have another one coming up because
you're thinking Chicago.
Oh, Chicago? Yeah, Detroit is different from Chicago, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Why did my brain? My brain is
Chicago, Michigan, and Detroit, Illinois.
Yes. Why?
I'll bet you there are actually both of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a Fargo, Georgia, after all, because that's not confusing. Of course, there's also Rome, Georgia, so they just like taking famous names for things, I guess.
Perhaps.
Sometimes they slap a new in front just to distinguish it from the one that's in Europe. It's like, yeah, this is not the one in Europe, by the way. Don't go there. This is not. We're not just going to call it Hampshire. We're going to call it New Hampshire because it's a new one.
It's Detroit Lakes went a slightly different route because it used to be just Detroit, but then they kept getting the mail mixed up, so they added the lakes to the end of it. Mm-hmm. As the story goes. But yeah, they didn't do the new Detroit either because, let's face it, nobody wants that.
If Detroit was so great, why didn't they make a Detroit 2? Imagine like in the future if we like settle Mars or something, just the names of the settlements being like New York 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Mm-hmm. It's like those initiatives where they let people vote on names for
and it
things.
just turns out to be Bodie McBoatface.
Yeah, man. That got so close.
I love the Minnesota DOT snowplow naming thing that goes on every winter.
The one I heard of that happened recently was Betty Whiteout.
They have like the entire fleet of snowplows has meme names, like all of them.
Nice.
You look up on the MnDOT Facebook page what they are, but
let's see.
They're all quite fun.
That's awesome.
We're doing this for the quality content.
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I supposed to riff while James looks
while I fumble over the keyboard?
Yeah, they're I'm trying to think of some other ones.
So
name snowplow contest.
Betty Whiteout, Control Salt Delete, The Big Leplowski, Plowsaurus Rex, Scoop Dog, Blizzard of Oz, No More Mr. Ice Guy, and Edward Blizzard Hands.
Although actually, I've never seen that movie, but I understand that becomes kind of the plot of the movie. So
You're like doing an ice sculpture at some point.
yeah, but that's how snow is made. It's the shavings from him making his ice sculptures.
Mm-hmm. It's just Johnny Depp, and he's got scissors for hands.
And he's depressed. I again haven't seen it before. I might at some point.
Is there anything older than this year?
I don't know. There's lots of things older than this year, like last year.
Yeah,
I think they've done this thing for a few years.
yeah. I want the ones from last year. Dang it.
Oh
well, you get the general gist of it.
They were on the Facebook page for MnDOT.
Are we going to do more audibly looking things up, or are we just going to continue with our...
We're just going to deal with it,
Yeah, I think we've established the point. The
point is, if
when we get to Mars, the snowplows on Mars are going to have funny names.
Because obviously there's going to be snowplows
Well, it's
on
like
Mars.
you go to like immigrant towns, they would just be like, crap, what do we name it? Let's name it the place we came from, Warsaw. Kiev, North Dakota, or Kiev. I guess that was the way it was pronounced back then.
Or like the further west you go, the less people cared, and it's like, this is
Cuba.
Yep. Gooding Jr.
Absaraka.
What's another one?
Welcome to literally just hell.
Memphis.
Rugby. How the heck a town became named Rugby in the middle of North Dakota?
Well, it's probably a guy's name, because a
Yeah.
lot of last names are come from their profession.
Although part of me wishes it was just sort of like this old-timey cult tradition of rugby in this one town.
Rugby's along Highway 2, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's probably the name of a railroadman.
Yeah.
That's how you got Hankinson and Dickinson and Jamestown and virtually every town in
Fargo's named
North.
after the Wells Fargo guy.
Who was first a railroad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Don't let those horses fool you.
like half of the towns in the West exist because they're along the train tracks because they need to stop for water periodically.
You have to stop. Somebody call
in
the
old-timey
railroad
days.
water crew. Back in the old timies.
Fargo grew up around the intersection of the Red River and the railroad.
Yep. You could haul stuff up and down on barges up to Winnipeg. I would like to go to Winnipeg someday. Apparently it's like a fairly decent sized city. My parents, John Paul II made a visit to Winnipeg one year, and they were kicking themselves that they didn't go because they lived in East Grand Forks at the time. So it's probably like a 4-hour drive, I guess, from there.
From Crookston, it's like 3.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's probably more like 2:45.
So it's actually
3,
closer than
2.5. Yeah,
Winnipeg is closer to Grand Forks than the Twin Cities. Driving time, anyway. That would be interesting. But yeah, I just need to go to Canada at all. I need to get
You need to?
Well, I don't need to, but I'd like to. I mean, imagine like
just
living
to
your
say
whole
you did,
life,
you know?
in one country.
It's like I traveled abroad, and by traveling abroad, I mean I drove my car up 3 hours. And
I've
drank
seen
some
Canada
maple syrup and then came back.
I guess you could call it the land of my ancestry, but that would be more accurately France. But
It's
Canadians.
the transitional land of my ancestry.
Yeah, it's sort of little bridge, the bridge area between.
And let's be real, you didn't originate in France either.
Well,
You trace everything back far enough.
yes,
Back to when
Africa.
it was ethnically homogenous.
Yeah,
Right.
in like Central Africa somewhere. If we want to go that far back.
Not many people care to,
No.
because then that obscures the whole idea of race.
The meaningful distinctions between heritages that occur in, everything after that.
One thing I find fascinating is like the technologies that exist on the different continents. It makes you wonder if those things were invented and then carried over, or different peoples developed the same technology simultaneously. Like the bow and arrow, for instance. Basically, every Aboriginal culture has one, or it's one of the oldest weapons. I'm no anthropologist, but
well, I mean, it's an effective way to get sharp sticks to fly through the air,
mm-hmm.
and it doesn't take many ingredients. It may take some skill and finesse and specific ingredients to fashion with any kind of scientific accuracy.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's a pretty simple machine. Like I can't imagine there was only one culture that developed the wheel, and then nobody else ever used wheels.
But I mean, imagine like just never needing a wheel, but then finding a wheel, and it's like, you know what, this is actually kind of handy. I could use this for a few things. It's it's always kind of interesting to be like, well, this being a finite universe, this thing was used for the first time by somebody somewhere.
Oh yes.
Well, you see philosophy developing in virtually every civilization around the same time. So it's like, that's not an unheard of thing.
True.
Now they are very different in their mindsets because different people thought up with them for the most part in several key ways.
I was reading an article recently where they were trying to figure out, like, because they've recently found fossilized human footprints in New Mexico, I believe, that are older than a lot of other artifacts in North America. So they're wondering, like, okay, so was the Bering Strait theory of people getting to North America right, or was it like the Pacific Islanders where they, just sort of got on boats and gradually found new lands?
Or could it have been a bit of both? A little bit of column
very
A,
well
a little
have
bit
been.
of column B.
Could have very well have been,
Those aren't mutually exclusive.
freaking ancient humans not leaving written records. What's wrong with you? What are written and what is record, they say. In this,
in the English language to this rhetorical question.
Yeah, right. Gosh. That was... So, being a good homeschool Christian household, we had... You guys ever watch the old Jesus of Nazareth, like 3 VHS tape series on the life of Christ from like the 80s or 90s?
I have not, actually.
It's actually decent, but the depiction of Jesus is a little bit... like a bit airy, if you know what I mean, just kind of like aloof and like, not aloof in like a sort of stuck up way, but just kind of like not
Space
there.
cadet.
Yeah, a bit of a space cadet.
Uh-huh.
But the other thing was, Aaron and Andre, 2 younger brothers, were constantly popping those tapes in, and my mom just kind of let it happen because, like, well, there are other things they could be watching, like Thomas the Tank Engine, for example, which apparently teaches kids to say "shut up," but. This long protracted argument with 4-year-old Aaron over no, Jesus did not speak English. It didn't exist yet. He was irate over this point. It's like he spoke Aramaic or Greek, depends. It's like, no, he spoke English.
Well, what you should have done is you should have showed him the Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
Did that exist when he was having this argument?
I don't think it.
It may not have.
When did it
It's
come out?
around that time.
I remember when it came out, there was a discussion among like my older siblings' youth group as to whether or not they should go because it's rated R.
2004. So this would have been, it would have been around by that point.
But it would have been, okay.
So he was a bit too young for that at the time, but it was rather amusing. The bitter insistence on obviously English is the superior language.
Obviously,
to a 4-year-old because it's the one
he knows.
Yeah, exactly.
And he doesn't know it well enough yet to know that it actually is kind of dumb.
The other thing too is all of the every time a foreigner is portrayed in an English-speaking film, it's from a certain era. It's always British people playing like,
true.
It's like why are all foreigners British? It's like
because
they're
British
exotic
colonized everywhere, and so the English pronunciations are more ubiquitous.
it's like
I
the
guess.
sepia filter of accents from the old timey days. To bring it back to the chat discussion from earlier,
right? Where it's like you go to like any arid country and suddenly everything is brown.
like you go across the Strait of Gibraltar from Spain to Morocco, and suddenly everything is very brown. Or even in Spain, depending on the movie. But it is kind of fascinating.
Now, what if we just there was a movie where every country was color coded differently? Like you go to America and everything's just like blue. Mm-hmm. It's like it's got this blue tint over it. But then you go to England and it's all like tinted red. Or somewhere else and it's all purple.
Yep.
I mean, for no real reason, maybe just make America brown.
Just make it. Anyway,
That'd make a lot of people happy, I imagine.
yeah. Speaking of making people happy, we're the Palladium Papists. I'm James.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Riley.
We're doing a philosophical today.
We are about a character who isn't a movie about a character who isn't very happy, but then becomes happy. So I guess the becoming happy or being happy transition.
Yeah.
A little bit fits anyway.
I'm happy.
We're talking about Gran Torino.
In a world where one man will decide whether to pull a lever and kill one man, or not pull a lever and allow 5 people to die, find out in Philosophical.
The Clint Eastwood film. What's funny that I was listening to Bishop Barron and Father Mike Schmitz were doing a conversation podcast, and they started talking about Gran Torino. I was like, gosh dang it, can we do something that somebody else hasn't, like some idea that somebody hasn't sniped? Anyway,
I mean, it's a good movie. So it came out in about 2008. It was directed by Clint Eastwood and is also starring Clint Eastwood.
as a lot of his films recently have been.
Yes.
East Clintwood.
Yes.
So you've got the movie starts out at a funeral. The funeral of Clint Eastwood. His character's name is Walt, but we'll probably just end up calling him Clint Eastwood for most of the time.
Yeah.
His wife died. They're I mean, it's 2008. Clint Eastwood's 2000. Yeah.
Yep.
So he's pretty old himself, and he's kind of an old grumpy guy that nobody really likes, even within his family, and that's fine because he doesn't like them either.
He's very stiff and gruff.
So you've got this. So it starts out, and they're all at the funeral, and this really young priest who's probably just first assignment out of seminary and stuff. He's like, so death is bittersweet, and gives this kind of cliche homily about the eulogy about how life is beautiful and death is.
There is an important difference between a eulogy and a homily. So it is a homily.
It is a homily.
Mm-hmm. Eulogy is not given.
It's about the woman. It's about their life. Yeah. My mistake. Anyway, so this displeases the Eastwood, as does the behavior of his family, who his 2 sons and their wives and their kids, kind of being disrespectful and disruptive in church, and this displeases him. So they go back to his house and for the reception, and people show up and start being like, so what you gonna do with all the stuff you got when you die, like your cool car? And this displeases him, so he goes out to the porch to drink a beer, and he looks at the neighbors, and the neighbors are a bunch of Asian immigrants, and this displeases him, being an old Korean War vet.
Yeah.
And just grumpy and racist and stuff like that. So he's not living his best life by any means.
No.
Meanwhile, the party next door is celebrating a new a baby. It's I don't know what the ceremony's called, but some kind of
ritual surrounding that. Because it's a Hmong family that's moved in next door.
Well,
they've
been
whole
there for a bit.
Really.
Yeah, the whole neighborhood's kind of being populated by
Detroit,
immigrants.
And the auto factories have sort of gone out of business, and so a lot of the old neighborhoods are slowly becoming lower income immigrant minority neighborhoods. So Detroit.
Yeah.
Typical white flight inner city stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Detroit. So
Except
stuff is a little sketchy.
With all the white flight happening, Eastwood is the only guy there because he's so set in his old house and his old ways.
And the old grandmother next door is saying
constantly just scowling at him.
Yeah, it's like, why doesn't the old white man leave?
So anyway, in this Hmong family, you have one a young man named Tao, and he is kind of looked down upon by his peers. There's a lot of gangs and stuff like that, and he's got a cousin in a gang, and he's like, hey man, why aren't you being cool and rolling with us and stuff? You're doing woman's work in the garden and stuff, man. We gotta man you up. And he's resistant to anything because
he wants to be a good kid, and he's kind of soft in some ways.
Yeah, but he keeps getting pushed around, and his sister keeps trying to stick up for him, but these gang guys are all tough and, hey man, come hang with us, come roll with us, come be cool. Hey, if you do it and you're cool.
Yep.
So eventually, a couple days pass, and they convince him to they try and initiate him into their gang, right? Where it's like, okay, if you can steal that old man's cool old vintage car, then you can roll with us, and you're cool, man. And so he goes over. So Tao goes to Clint Eastwood's garage and tries to steal the car, but Clint Eastwood gets up, grabs his gun, and chases him out of his garage and stuff. And so that was a failed attempt. So because of that failed attempt, Tao is kind of being pushed around even harder by his gang relatives and friends. Air quotes, friends. They're not actually friendly to him. So the following night, a kind of scuffle breaks out in their front yard. It kind of spills over into Clint Eastwood's yard, and he comes out like, "Get off of my lawn!" He's got a gun and everything, threatens the gang kids,
and they're like,
"This
guy is a little scary. We're gonna listen to what he says."
I've killed people like you in Korea all those years ago. I'd sleep just fine doing it again because I am old and I'm angry and bitter and racist and stuff. And so he chases him off, and the family's like, "Oh, thank you," and he's like, "Yeah, get off my lawn," and goes home.
And all the Hmong families the next day start bringing him food and flowers and gifts, and he's like, "What is all this about?"
Well, it's because you saved Tao. Tao, say thank you, and he's like, "Thank you."
And it's also because Tao has brought dishonor on the family. The mother says he must serve Walt for a week or something
to pay off the debt for. Well, I tried to steal your car, and he's like, "I don't like you even more now, Toad. Go away."
Yep.
So later, after also around this time, the priest makes several more visits to Walt, and he's like, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you because your wife said she wanted you to go to confession and for me to keep an eye on you in case of stuff.
She made me promise to keep bugging you about it."
And he's like, "Well, stop bugging me about it because I don't want to be lectured by a 27-year-old virgin who spent way too much time in a book." And the priest is persistent and shows up for several more scenes. And then one day, Walt is driving home in his truck and sees Tao's sister and some guy friend she's hanging with being kind of hassled by another group of just street thugs, and he kind of observes from a distance for a while, just not sure, not wanting to help, but also being like, I can't just let this happen. So he goes and he's like, hey, he flashes his gun and it's like, hey, girl, get in the truck. I'm going to drive you home. You dumb dork kid she's rolling with, go home. That's played by Clint Eastwood's son. Also, you other kids, don't make a move or I'm going to shoot you.
Yep. So
yeah, he drives her home and they have a bit of a conversation. She's kind of a sparky kid with some personality to her, and they kind of hit it off in a bickering kind of way. She explains, yeah, we're about what's up with the Hmong and stuff coming into America, because it's like, hey, during the Korean War,
Vietnam, yeah.
During Vietnam, we fought on the American side, but so when they pulled out, we had nowhere else to go. So,
yep,
that's why us people are here, and then
blame the Lutherans.
the Lutherans put us in
Everybody
Chicago.
blames the Lutherans.
And so yeah, they hit it off, and then Tao comes to start working for Clint, and so he gives him some menial tasks initially, like not wanting to
like go count
even
the
give
birds
him the
in
time
that
of
tree.
day. But after a while, he realizes, oh wait, the neighbor across the street, I've always hated looking at how poorly maintained his yard is.
Why don't you go fix up that
Why
guy's
don't you go
house?
fix up that guy's roof? And then over the next week or so, he has him actually do a bunch of odd jobs for a bunch of other people. And it's like, hey, well, I've got...
people in the neighborhood kind of catch on, so they start placing requests for stuff to have Tao fix.
And of course, being a very old guy who used to work in the Ford factory, he's got a bunch of tools that he can just loan to Tao to get the odd jobs done.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, he really kind of starts taking an interest in Tao and how he's
Very
really
hardworking.
He's well-meaning. He just has no direction right now. He like goes to their house during some kind of get-together and sees that there's a girl that he clearly likes, and she is very interested in him. And he's like, "Well, why don't you go talk to her? If I were you, I'd have been all over her by now." That kind of a thing. So it's like
goes around like fixes their washing machine in the basement just because he can't help himself.
right. And so eventually he's like, "Okay, Tao, I'm gonna man you up. I'm gonna get you a job. So you can buy your own car. So you want to get your life straight. You ever want to be a man? Well, let's do this." So there's this funny scene where they talk to the barber. He pulls some strings and brings up some old acquaintances to get him a job in construction and stuff. And so now Tao's just trying to be an honest worker, do an honest job.
And by this point, he and
maybe go to
Walter
college someday, sort of thing.
And by this point, they become good friends.
Right. There's Walt is still very curmudgeonly and old in his way, and he's still very casually racist toward everybody.
Yep.
But they've just kind of roll with it, and it's like, yeah, this is just kind of him. He's not upfront about being affectionate, particularly since his he has no relationship with his family anymore. His son and daughter-in-law show up. It's like, hey, happy birthday,
it's
Grandpa.
Sort of implied like he was never really close to his two sons, and they just sort of gave up trying to please him and live their own lives.
Right. And so there's no ties there really.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, man, he starts becoming a closer family to these foreign strangers than he is with his own flesh and blood.
Mm-hmm.
So one day, while Tao is coming home from work, his gang friends show up and is like, "Hey man, where you been?" It's like, I've got a job. I'm coming home from my job, guys. Leave me alone. It's like, so they keep hassling him. They burn a cigarette butt in his face, that kind of stuff. And so they send him home, and Clint's like, "Hey, what happened to you?" It's like, it's that gang. They keep messing with me, and this doesn't go over well. This displeases the Clint, and so he goes over and beats up on one of the gang people, and he's like, "Hey, you stay away from that kid, you hear?" Which may not have been the brightest thing to do, because then the gang retaliates by doing a drive-by shooting at his house, and
Sue and Tao both end up getting hurt.
Very hurt, yes. And so Tao was very indignant. It's like, okay, we got to retaliate. We got to fight back, man, for what they did to me, for what they did to my sister particularly. And Clint's like, calm down, kid. We got to do this carefully. We got to be. We can't just go rushing in, or we're going to get ourselves killed, right?
Yep. In the meantime, Walt has been like coughing up blood, and goes to the doctor. Things aren't going great, so he started trying to think about trying to get his affairs in order.
So yeah, he has a plan that he's decided to not involve Tao in. So he goes around town. He gets his confession in with the priest, and the priest is like, "What are you gonna do, Walt?"
He's convinced that he's gonna go and just shoot up the gang house.
confessions don't work forwards, right?
Yep.
He goes and gets another a haircut with his barber friends. He gets a fitted suit and stuff, and he's like, "Oh, I've never done this before." Mm-hmm. So then he goes to.
Well, he tells Tao, like, okay, come over at 4:00 and I'll let you know what the plan is. So he locks Tao in the basement and is like, I gotta do this alone. I don't need you coming with and ruining things.
Yeah, because earlier the gang wasn't really held responsible because there were no like actual witnesses and nobody wanted to come forward about it because the Hmong people are so tightly knit like that.
Mm-hmm. But it's become clear to Walt that like this family isn't going to be able to get anywhere because this gang keeps hassling them and holding them back.
Mm-hmm. Like how Tao's sister put it earlier. She was like, yeah, the girls go to college, the boys go to jail. That's how things work around here. So yeah, Walt drives up to the house that the gang is hanging out in. He gets their attention. He's like, hey, you guys better stop it. Pulls a cigarette out of his coat pocket. They're all jumpy with their guns and stuff. He's like, anybody got a light? And he reaches into his inside coat pocket. They all shoot him up. And he was just reaching for his lighter. And so the police
rather
arrive,
deliberately, like telegraphing he has a gun,
when in fact he does not. And so the police show up on the scene,
and there are a bunch of people in the neighborhood watched it. There were witnesses.
So they clearly have this gang, the evidence that they just killed a guy who was completely unarmed. It was in no way self-defense or anything. So all the gang people are going to jail. Clint Eastwood, his character, Walt, I should say, has died. And so everybody goes to his funeral. And during the reading of the will, he donates his house to the church. And his prize Gran Torino that he built himself in the 70s goes to Tao. And that is where the movie ends.
Yep.
And Clint Eastwood sings.
Clint Eastwood sings the first verse of the song in the credits.
Yep. Imagine like trying to sing immediately after waking up in the morning and swallowing like a bucket of gravel.
Just gargle with gravel.
Yep. Gargling gravel like a turkey.
Indeed.
That's about what it sounds like. But it's touching nonetheless.
That is the plot to the film Gran Torino.
Yes.
It's about a racist old white guy who becomes a closer family to his
finds
immigrant neighbors than his
redemption
own
and manages to redeem
others through his actions.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what do we like about Gran Torino? As of recording this, we just watched this.
Yeah, I'm the only one who had seen it prior to watching it last night. Mm-hmm. So I'll start. You guys start.
I think the arc of the priest is very interesting. He's like, you can really tell he's very green at first because he like, he jumps out into the scene all zealous and enthusiastic, but really not having any clue what he's about.
Right, and he's preaching to people 3 times his age, and they're all like
about life and death. And here's Walt, who's literally killed people and lived a life, had a family, and buried his wife.
Well, it was during their conversation about life and death. The priest points out, it's like, you seem to know a lot more about death than you do about living.
Mm-hmm. He's more wise than might first appear, I suppose.
Yep.
Because seminary does teach you about those sorts of things because it's part of the job description.
Mm-hmm.
You're around death a lot, surprisingly enough. It's like it's not unheard of for a priest to go and bless a body, of someone who's died in any number of gruesome ways. So it's like, I don't know. He may not have had those experiences personally yet, the priest in our rendition, but
and he's pretty direct and upfront with Walt, trying to he's like, well, your wife made me promise to make you go to confession, so I'm gonna keep persisting with you. But he manages to sort of find ways to.
He exercises a pastoral sensitivity and how do I reach Walt? What are his needs? What are his concerns? What is he worried about? What will reach him?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's a good depiction.
It's like after their first meeting where he really blows him off, he meets him. He continues to meet him more and more at Walt's level, and
finding him at the bar and talking to him like at his house and things like that.
Which really allows Walt to open up to him a little more and more, in addition to Walt's own arc where he's becoming more and more other people oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Though I don't know what priest in the world has that much time to
dedicate to a single
to a
parishioner.
single person.
Mm-hmm. It works for the story.
It's for the
anyway.
plot.
It works for the story.
His role makes sense in the movie as as you would imagine a Catholic priest ought to fit in, pastorally speaking. And obviously, the biggest thing in the movie is Walt's change over the course of it, right? I mean, because there's some things, he remains kind of the same. He's an old man set in his ways, but
but his attitude toward everything shifts fundamentally.
Yep. He's lived his life. He still has regret. He has regrets about, he says in confession, I was never close to my sons, and I've always felt pretty bad about that, and a few other things. And so he, over the course of the movie, finds different things that he makes right in some way and gives him more peace. He sort of has almost a kind of father figure role with Tao. And
Tao's father's not in the picture right now.
Yeah, I think their dad's dead.
Unclear.
Not
the point
there.
is, he wasn't the strong role model when he was in their life, and now he isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and so he's sort of a fatherly figure for Tao and Sue, and a protector as well. And he also he helps fix up the neighborhood, which is or he makes Tao help him fix up the neighborhood, which is kind of fun. And he sort of builds up Tao's confidence to the point where Tao can directly challenge him. It's no, I'm gonna help you pull this fridge up the stairs. I'm gonna be on the top because that's heavier, and you're an old man. So if you aren't gonna let me do it, then I'm just going to leave you alone to it. He's like, okay, fine. And the aforementioned scene at the barber shop where he's teaching him how to talk smack with the barber.
But it's very funny because him and the barber have this rapport that would probably goes back 10, 20 years at least. So he talks to him like an old friend who knows how to dish out what they take it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when he tells Tao to come back and talk to him like a man, he starts swearing at him the way that
he's what are you doing?
What are you doing? You just met the man. So he doesn't have he has a slightly old-fashioned and toxic view of masculinity, but also kind of well-meaning in the example he wants to set for Tao.
Yeah, he still has some of the authentic attributes of masculinity that manage to shine through in the end.
It's just he's also a very old grumpy guy, so that kind of overshadows most of it.
Yeah. I suppose you could say life and death are sort of the theme of the movie, which we can get into in Unity.
Right.
Let's see. What was another cool thing I liked?
Interestingly, the opening of the movie highlights this.
Yeah. Because
it begins with a funeral and the Hmong equivalent of a baptism, or a christening of some kind, right?
Yep.
Where it's the end of a life and a beginning of a life, which could be seen as representing Walt's own new direction.
Yeah, and he's sort of in the twilight of his life, and Tao and Sue are kind of they're teenagers, starting to come to their own and trying to find their place in the world.
And in that way, the ending ends with the end of a life and the beginning of a life in a way.
Yeah, because the family has a new life without the gang over there.
They're allowed
overshadowing them.
Yeah. So it's bookended very nicely and artistically.
Yep. Yeah, I suppose one of the things Walt changing to be more outwardly because after his wife died, he's sad because she's gone, but he's also seems to be kind of comfortable being alone because he's got his dog, he's got his beer, and he's got his newspapers. Mows the lawn every day.
You kind of get the impression that his wife was the last thing kind of holding his family together. Mm-hmm. where it's like the kids only showed up for the funeral and then they hardly appear in the rest of the movie, aside from trying to.
And when Walt sort of
into
tries to like reach out and like reconnect when he realizes he's probably gonna die, it's sort of rebuffed, I guess, by his sons.
His relationship with his sons are very transactional. It's like, hey, we're going to try and get you into an institution, or hey, do you still know the guy that has the tickets you were talking about? Like, they have a transactional relationship with their father.
Yep.
And it's not like an authentic parent-child relationship, you know?
Yeah.
Unlike which he actually gets a proper relationship with the neighbor and their kids, right?
Yep.
He even kind of tries to patch things up with the grandma in the house next door. He's like, "Hey, take care of my dog Daisy before he goes out."
She's saying something in her native language at him. He's like, "Yep, love you too, you old hag." But yeah, he managed to set all of his things in order. And, you know, bring them out of the nasty situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll call back to when the priest said, "You know more about death than you do about living." He actually begins living a life through his relationship with Tao and his family.
Like they have him over for dinner, and he sort of awkwardly manages to
insult them in every possible way before.
But then they still like him enough to keep giving him food and stuff. And he even has
particularly after he gets Tao to do their chores.
Yep. And then he manages to like he even has like Sue and Tao and then Tao's girlfriend over for a barbecue at his own place and welcomes them into his home and all that.
And then after Tao loses his tools because the gang came up and hassled him. He's like, I can get you new tools. Also, he buys Tao all of the equipment he needs to get his job started. He's like, you can pay me after your first paycheck, whatever.
Yep.
So he's,
goes from somebody who's very
closed in.
He's got
a hard shell and not going to come out of it. To someone who has become very open and vulnerable with these people at times. Particularly when they're at their worst, and he's like, I don't want you to go through having to take someone's life because it's an awful thing to have to do, and you don't have to do it.
Yep.
There's another way out of this.
Right. Which I suppose sort of gets us into the truths if we don't have anything else we want to say about the movie.
I have other cool things that properly fit into the other
categories?
to the transcendentals.
Okay. All right, then.
So let us go.
Truth. What are truths we can find in Gran Torino?
Get busy living or get busy dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
To quote another...
To quote another classic
film. This the ponderful piece on life and death and what it really means to live and what it means to die and to do so in a meaningful way.
Because the sort of the Hmong shaman or something to that effect was sort of looks Walt over and he's like, you don't enjoy your life, you have things you regret, and
you have no peace.
Yeah, you have no peace. And so that sort of resonates with Walt because he knows, of course, it's true. So he drills down and finds the things that are, not allowing him to have peace, and gradually, I guess, makes peace with the different parts of his life that he sort of repressed all these years.
Even at the end where previously all he knew of death was how awful it felt and how it felt even worse when they gave you a medal for doing it. But he turns that around and it's like, well, his death was used to save this whole family and their entire future and livelihood.
Yep. Or instead of taking life to solve a problem, he gives his life.
And where life previously for him had no real value beyond maybe his relationship with his wife.
And when she was gone, it was basically the dog was all he had left.
Right. So nobody and nothing to particularly live for. He just kind of existed.
He polishes his Gran Torino. He sits and drinks beer on the porch with his dog, and that's about what he does with his days.
But then he had people to live for,
mm-hmm.
and in Tao and his family,
mm-hmm.
and
the broader community around him.
And the broader community, yeah. And he kind of became a fixture in this community.
Because they keep bringing him like food and flowers and stuff, and he keeps being like, "No more. Wait, are those the chicken dumplings? Okay, you can bring those in."
Just his subtle opening up to their hospitality and kindness,
mm-hmm.
till it got to the point where, because he had something to live for, he also had something to die for.
Yep. Any other truths we can talk about? I guess, life is best lived for others. Like,
it's the only real way to live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you can exist while just doing whatever or living for yourself.
Yeah,
but the life truly worth living is a life lived for others.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of part of the point.
Yeah. Let's see. Also, the only way to end the cycle of violence is to not engage in it.
Right. Because had they retaliated with violence for the violence committed against them, it would have just snowballed and it would have perpetuated the way it has since the Hmong came to the community.
Yep.
You know? Or the other gangs.
Well, and
in
he
Chicago.
tells that to Tao. It's like,
Detroit?
Yeah.
I did that again!
Chicago, Detroit, basically the same thing.
Why am I... Anyway, big city somewhere.
Yep. The he tells Tao as much. Like he's like, they're expecting you to be all angry and try to get revenge for what they did to your family and your sister. So you have to be smarter than them. We have to think this through and find the best way out of it. And he manages to show Tao is like, it's like killing is only going to make things worse for you.
The only way to break a cycle of violence is non-violently.
Yeah.
It's sacrifice and mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And the pursuit of true justice, because, the gang had sort of gotten away with the things it had done with more or less impunity because people were unwilling to stand up to it. And they probably wouldn't have been able to meaningfully, like, get them like punished in a way where they couldn't come back and make things 1,000 times worse when they got out of jail for a crime. But he manages by sacrificing himself to do away with the evil once and for all. So I suppose we're getting kind of into the goodness here.
We are sliding into that territory, so why don't we just officially make that transition?
Yeah, goodness. The goodness in Gran Torino. The ultimately good thing in the movie is Walt's sacrifice.
Yes.
It even represented, like, as he lays dying, he's
very cruciform.
He's laying cruciform, yeah.
I love how that shot, when it first looks on him, he's like, there's a little pool of blood in his palm.
Mm-hmm.
It's also focusing on his palm because he's got the lighter in there, but then the blood trickles down his sleeve. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. And also the Hmong family is
Sue's pretty great.
She is.
She's got a lot of fire in her. And she's sort of at first kind of bossing Tao around, but only because she wants what's best for him and for him to do something with his life. So she's like kind of pushing him.
Right. And he was kind of a stubborn kid who wouldn't do anything.
I'm just looking something up because I was trying to see. Okay, I was going to see if the First Cavalry's motto had any sort of symbolic value, but I guess not, because that was his unit in the war. Anyway.
Yeah, that was also what was on his lighter.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Sue's a good character who actually is the first person to like poke in at Walt's defenses and kind of draw him out and into their family.
Mm-hmm.
She drags him to their
translates for the relatives and stuff. It's like, what was it? What was her grandma was yelling, and he was like,
She says, "Welcome to our home."
He's
She
like-
didn't say that. Yeah, she didn't.
that was pretty funny.
But she's the one that really gives him a chance and like really tries to open him up in a meaningful way, and also tries to.
And it's pretty clear that Walt like respects her for that.
If nothing else, for just how persistent she is.
And she gets away with calling him Wally, and he's like, "Don't call me Wally," but she keeps doing it anyway, and he doesn't really do anything.
And he
about it.
keeps insulting her and slinging slurs east and west, and she's like, it rolls off her. Whatever.
Let's see what other elements of goodness I guess are in the movie. Other than, I mean, we've talked about the main ones.
Yeah, we talked about like there are several good characters that
The priest is a good character.
the priest is
obviously.
a good character. Obviously.
That's not obvious anymore.
No,
True.
No.
In Hollywood movies,
In
I would say it's more so not.
It's probably one of the most fair depictions of a priest in a Hollywood movie I've seen in a long time.
It's not like
Because Clint Eastwood.
this guy's
cool.
a perfect, know-it-all. He's very human and doesn't take the right approach the first time around, but it's
Well, and it's contrasted like his homily at Walt's wife's funeral at the beginning versus his homily at the end, where he manages
he
to.
says something to the effect of, the first time I met Walt, he said that I don't know anything about life and death, and he was right.
And through a little bit of self-deprecating humor is like, well, he straight up says what Walt told him is like, because I was a overeducated virgin,
27-year-old virgin
who spent too much time in a book. but yeah, he manages to deliver a pretty good homily, and I think at one point Walt just like calls him out. It's like, it sounds like the homily you were given at my wife's funeral sounded like it just came straight out of a handbook, and he more or less admitted, it kind of was. But yeah, he by working with Walt pastorally manages to sort of grow as a priest.
And that is interesting how you get everybody interacts with Walt, right? They all kind of give something to him, but they also all learn something from him.
Yep.
Where it's like it is all relationships are a two-way street. You affect the other as much as they affect you. And so you get to see the effect every character in the movie had on Walt, as well as the effect he has on everyone else. In the end, mostly for the positive.
Yeah. Let's see, beauty. What is beautiful about Gran Torino?
It is a very grounded film.
Yeah, I'd say it's primarily the symbolism. Because,
Yes.
I mean, the cinematography is fairly standard. Like, it's good. But, like...
And the
it's
language is very harsh on
Right.
Walt's part.
It's a very human film.
Yes.
With all of the dust and scratches.
Warts and all.
Yep.
But,
There
like-
are no perfect characters, but there are characters whose, like, virtues outweigh their vices, I suppose. Or they grow in virtue over the course of the movie.
Yeah. It's very honest, but also very hopeful in its depiction of just this guy's life.
Yeah. And I think it was like, as Bishop Barron put it, it's like sort of a great demonstration of like the Christus Victor archetype, where, sacrificing oneself for the sake of others.
But also very
by him, like
initially very, very resistant to it.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, he's one thing about Walt, he's like a very duty bound guy, because old army guy, but then he worked
for like the Ford factory for
he's very
40
loyal.
years or something.
But like at his wife's funerals, people are coming in, he's just sort of standing at attention next to her casket.
Also, just very awkwardly, because he doesn't want to mingle with these people because he doesn't particularly care for them.
Yep. But yeah, it's funny though, like the kids at the grandma's funeral were kind of like goofing off, and the teenage daughter was kind of dressed disrespectfully, but then when at Walt's funeral, they're all dressed and they're being very quiet and polite, and they're all dressed properly for the funeral and stuff the second time around.
While also side-eyeing the people they've never met before in the other aisles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, it's sort of like Walt's family grows over the course of the movie.
Yeah, there's more of them that attend the second funeral than the first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, like, it does use its visuals kind of creatively in that way. It's very subtle, but it's like, if you look, there's symbolism there. There's stuff. So, like, beauty isn't its strongest suit, but it's...
Yeah, it's beauty, like, in how it's the writing and
the simplicity of its
practical and
presentation.
elegant.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. Yeah. Unity, what brings everything together. I think, the life and death. Both natural, but both can be done well.
Yeah.
Well or poorly.
Yeah.
And it gives you good examples of both it being done well and it being done poorly, and it being done well after having been done poorly for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like...
No one
is
both
beyond
redeems
salvation.
and brings redemption to others.
When done
Redeems himself and brings redemption to others. Yeah. By mending his ways and shielding Tao and Sue and their family from... I keep coming back to that, but it's really like the main thing in the movie.
That's like the main thing the entire film builds up to. It's the defining moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's about all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
We covered most of the life and death stuff earlier, so
cool.
But it's like that's what brings it all together. It's although the title Gran Torino about the car. I wonder what exactly the car symbolizes.
I mean,
it's
sort of the pinnacle of his achievement, I think, in his own mind. Because he
worked for the factory, he put the steering column.
It sort of
in that
represents
thing,
him
in a way. But he maintains the car better than he maintains his own life.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't trust anybody else with the car.
And him passing the car on to Tao sort of symbolizes how he hands on like all the values.
His own legacy and what's important to him.
How, even though both of his sons and their kids would have much preferred having...
They've sort of rejected his legacy, though. Like, for example, like he worked at the Ford factory and
his son sells, Toyota cars?
Yep. Foreign Japanese cars. Like apparently the story goes, like at a certain time if you drove a import car in Detroit, you probably would have had people throwing things at you or worse. So that type of thing. But yeah, his sons have sort of rejected him and he rejected them in a lot of ways, but he still manages to pass on his legacy, and that's kind of
in
represented
the
by
son
his
he kind of adopted.
Yeah. And that's represented by the Gran Torino.
There you go.
But yeah, I guess with that, thanks for listening to the Palladium Papists. You can listen to us on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and leave us a rating to let us know what you think of the show. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Papists. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, or suggestions for future episodes, email us at palladiumpapists@gmail.com. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.